I don't know about you, but I'd be lost without my phone. I use it for everything, checking on emails, social media, everything to do with work and a bit of entertainment as well. And of course, I use it for maths. But of course, whenever I was a child, screens didn't come quite so easily to hand, and I can't help but wonder what effect these things are having on the children of today. So I've come here to children in Northern Ireland to find out about a special report they have just published called Virtual Lives. Ellen, thank you so much for inviting me along for a bit of a chat today. I really appreciate it. I'd love to know more. Why did you decide to research this topic?
It was really interesting. Children in Northern Ireland were delivering cyber safety workshops to hundreds of parents back in 2017, and some of them were actually coming up to me and asking, you know, we have the information on cyber safety, but can you tell me how can I limit screen time, and is there any guidance out there for screen time? Because some of them were saying that they were finding it hard to navigate, well, what is the right amount of screen time for my child? And also they were telling me that they were having arguments with their children to try and stop them from using screens. So they were asking, well, are there any apps out there, or how, apart from manually limiting screen time, what else can I do? So we decided to ask parents, and we were delighted with the response. We had over 112 parents completed a questionnaire. We also held more in-depth interviews with parents, some of whom are MLAs.
As a parent, I do have some concerns with regard to screen time, and I can be quite candid and honest about it and say that I probably contributed to that. When I sit down and I think about it and evaluate it, I think actually maybe there was too much time spent on allowing my son, for instance, to play on the PlayStation or Xbox or whatever he had at the time, and lost out on a little bit of dad and son time, or daughter and dad time, and they're a wee bit bigger now. But I think that it's certainly across the society at the moment, you can see that we're buried, and we're setting a bad example as adults too, buried in our phones.
As a parent of 3 young kids, they're 5, 3 and 1, I do have concerns over screen time. I think it's such, you just don't know the impact it's having. It's an easy go-to as a parent to have screen time and not having any quantifiable restrictions or knowing how much is too much. It's tricky.
So my name's Dave Thompson. I was a teacher in primary school for 20 years. I have left the classroom. I now work in facilitation and training, but in those 20 years I've seen the effects of screens becoming increasingly more prominent. And I'm also familiar with the effects on my 13-year-old and 16-year-old, as well as the effects on myself and my wife as adults who also increasingly use screens as part of our work.
Screen use is something I think that we all have a lot of in our life. I know I have to put my hand up and say that I'm guilty of lifting my phone. Before my feet even get out of the bed in the morning, I lift my phone, I check it for work messages. We're on social media all day for my job as well. And I have to admit that the last thing I do at night is set my phone down on the table. And I guess kids are probably guilty of maybe of aping their parents sometimes in that way, in the amount of time that we spend on our screens. But what did the parents that you spoke to tell you?
I think the headline figure from the research was that children between the ages of 4 and 15 are spending on average 11 to 36 hours per week using screens. And I have to say that that is actually a guesstimate, because parents, especially for teenagers, parents don't know how long their children are spending using screens. They can spend time using screens on the way to school, on the bus, on the way home. In fact, sometimes they use it in the bathroom as well.
I have 3 girls, 7, 5 and 1, and certainly screens are part of modern living, but it is about finding that balance between when they're coming in from school maybe tired and sitting on the sofa and watching a TV show is a good way for them to relax, but to make sure that it's not dominating family life, especially with the factor that I and my husband as well are probably heavily reliant on our own screens, and it's managing my own screen time and the fact that you're looking into a phone and speaking on a phone a lot of the time, and that you're home and being aware. That's not a good example to be setting.
There's also a need for adults to look seriously at the amount of time that they spend on screens, and it's almost certainly more than we think we do, because we constantly check our mobile phones. Very often the mobile phones come to the bedroom and they're used as an alarm clock. So they're used from first thing in the morning to last thing at night. Do any of us really now have an hour in the day without a mobile phone on us somewhere? And children pick that up. When we are so addicted to using our screens of various kinds, it says something to the children around us.
As a parent of children, I have a son 10 and daughter 6. I am concerned about their screen time use, and as parents we have to practice what we preach. There's no point us setting down these strict barriers and not, if I'm putting down my phone to tell my child get off that screen and pick it back up again, I'm not setting a good example. If I'm sending emails when we're sitting around the dinner table, I'm not setting a good example. So it's about setting a culture in the house. It's in, yes, there's maybe time we'll all sit together and watch a movie, play video games together. There will be times where I have to do work, but then it's about saying these are times where we all come off screens and we find other activities, and that's a challenge for me as a parent as much as it be for my children, but we should meet that challenge.
And the parents that you spoke to, did they talk about any sort of health impact they were worried about?
There's a lot of research out there that is contradictory. So for our research, it was what parents were telling us from their own experience. And they told us that they were concerned about the physical impact of the screens, for example, poor eyesight, brain development and motor skills. But what was also interesting, they were talking about the social interaction, that they were receiving information all the time, but they weren't interacting as a family around the dinner table, that everybody was on different screens all the time. So there's that interaction as well. And in fact, some parents refer to it as an addiction. They were concerned about the mental health of their children as well. And I guess that's one thing that I would say, that all this information is coming directly from the parents. They're the ones that know their child the best, and it's about providing the information to them so that they can make an informed choice.
So as a parent of 2 young children, I've found it quite challenging to control and steer screen time in a constructive way. Found also in a modern world where digital technology is everywhere, and all of us, adults, children, utilise screens for many different usage, that dinner times, travel times, family times, interacting with each other, you do genuinely have to fight against that urge to access the screen for whatever reason. So really, I guess as parents, having guidance and creative ways to make sure that we are parenting properly, to ensure that those really important family times are maximised for human social interaction, and that they're not devalued by what used appropriately can be a useful device, doesn't take away from that.
So in the early years, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that children now have fewer motor skills than they did have in previous years. Going back to my childhood, there was a limited amount of television that was available. And that has changed now to children's capacity to use mobile phones, if they're allowed, maybe it's their parents' mobile phone or an iPad, or some interactive type of screen. And the effect of that is, it's not that the screens themselves are bad, but that the screens, they fill a gap that could be used for other things, particularly using a pencil, colouring in, using a crayon, grabbing a paintbrush, getting a a Pritt stick or a pot of glue and cutting. Particularly children really struggle in P1 and P2 with using a child's pair of scissors. As well as all of that, it's not just those motor skills, it's the creativity that comes with those motor skills. Children at 3, 4, 5 and beyond should be making choices about what I like to make, what would I like to do, can I cut that up, can I make something, can I use it in a game, can I play with that, can I go back and do something different. And what we want children to develop is the freedom and independence and creativity to create other things for themselves, because that creation of possibility is something that follows them into adult life. And I think screens limit the development of those choices.
I think one of the things that we're probably all guilty of, so this would be for adults and for children, and I'm speaking from experience here, is that it's another form of addiction. And so I would use Facebook and Twitter quite a lot to promote my political messages, but I found myself getting sucked into the whole likes and shares and doing the count and the many friends, and it's like a drug. And you watch how many views you get on your videos, and what you're doing is you're taking time away from what you should be doing. And thankfully I've got a wife who isn't too slow in saying to me, put your phone down, put it away, and I listen and I do what I'm told, and I've thought about it, and I have lost literally dozens, if not hundreds of hours literally doing this, and there's no added value. So in this year, whilst I will use social media and I will have some time, screen time, because I do believe it has a purpose, it's trying to find the purpose, the value of it, and using it to its fullest extent, but not taking away from the value of spending time with the people that actually matter most to you.
I've talked to other parents who, like myself, have noticed maybe a bit of a difference between how boys and girls use screens. But did that show itself to be true whenever you did this report?
It was actually very interesting. What I found was, right at the younger age range, there wasn't much of a difference. But in the teenage years, boys were spending more time using screens than girls. But I also noticed there's a difference in the devices. So girls were using smartphones more, they were using apps more, they were using tablets more, whereas boys were more interested in the consoles. And I guess that has problems in two areas. For example, boys could be using games that aren't appropriate for their age. In fact, one parent told us that they had stopped use of a particular computer game completely because they were concerned about the aggression of their child. Another parent was concerned for their daughter because she was looking at videos, music videos, and they were concerned about the gender stereotyping at such a young age, the language that was used in some of the videos, and also how they were encouraged to dress as well.
I think is common. My son spends a lot more time on screens than my daughter, and I think the worry for me is the social isolation. You know, so I've sort of found two ways to combat that. One is to limit the screen time so that there is space to do other things, but also to engage in the screen time with him. So to sit and play video games and that sort of thing, so that he's not as on his own doing it. But you don't want your child limited to one interest, and we know the harm of screen time, and it is I suppose, a constant concern.
I have a young son who enjoys computer games like many young boys, and a daughter who loves music videos, dance videos and programs. My son in particular was spending quite a lot of time on one particular computer game. A key concern of mine was when I noticed mood change in my son as a result of playing. That really concerned me, and I felt at that point in time I had to try and employ tactics to limit the time spent on that game or rule out use of that game entirely. In the end, it was quite challenging to see that actually happening. I had hoped that it would be a game that would be fun, light-hearted, and in the end it actually really affected his aggression levels, the way in which he was speaking to me and his mum, and we felt we needed to intervene at that point. I tried to employ limiting the time that he would be on that from day to day, and in the end we concluded that actually it couldn't be controlled, the amount of time. He himself said to me, I can't play it for that amount of time, and that was the real trigger for me that decided I've tried my best to limit the time, but I think we need to move to ruling out this particular game. And the fascinating outcome of that for me was the extent of the peer pressure he experienced from friends as a result of not having access to that game. Illustrated to me the real reach and the power of that particular screen medium. It was a short period of time, and eventually he found enjoyment in other computer games that we were slightly more comfortable with and moved on. My daughter, it's a more challenging scenario, less specific computer games or specific programs, but more a general use and maybe concern about the nature and the type of content that she would be viewing. So guidance for me, or information around apps, tactics and tools that I could use to make sure that that is a safe use of screen time for her, is definitely something that I would find useful.
So what did you discover about how parents are dealing with the issue of screen time, and how are they combating it? How are they limiting that time?
It was really interesting because some parents are manually doing that. For example, they're going into the child's bedroom telling them to come off, but that comes with its own issues in terms of arguments and stuff. And parents were saying that, you know, they would like other information and apps and information on technology as to how else they can limit their child's screen time use. For example, in my home, we have a particular broadband provider where you can put in the time limits. So everyone knows, oh, I'm going to have this amount of time on the screen and this is when it stops. So parents are asking for more information on that.
That guidance for parents, what should it look like and where should it be coming from?
Well, that was one of the questions that we asked parents, and they told us that they would like guidance in terms of the length of time, but they would also like the evidence behind that. They also said that they would like information on how you can work with your child to have healthy screen time, because I think that's one of the things that this has pointed out. There are good uses to screen time. We live in a world where we use screens all the time, so there is good use of them, and it's how to find that balance. And for us, parents are the best people to make that decision. They're just asking for more information and more guidance so that they can make an informed choice.
I think it would be really helpful for parents to have, you know, guidance. I'm not saying that you should be given, only let them have 2 hours a week or a day, because each child's different. I do think that what parents need to be told is the impact of it, you know. If you lay it all out in front of parents, and they can make the best choice because they will see all the possibilities. And maybe also working in alternatives to screen time as well within the guidance. You know, you can't stop this influx of social media and screens that are present in our lives as adults and increasingly in our children's lives. So having those guidance just will help parents navigate this world of unknown, you know, that every parent looks to something, and it's comforting and reassuring to know, okay, right, well, I've read this and I can take these bits and apply that to my family, and it takes a bit of the stress out of it.
I think guidance for parents on the amount of almost healthy screen time would be useful. I know in the earlier years we were very strict about the number of hours, and then it starts to ebb away, and I think that's in part because, again, particularly my son, you know, it's the first thing he thinks to do when he's got downtime is go onto a screen, and I suppose it's the easiest thing for parents. So having a guide that says, look, anything beyond this is unhealthy would reinforce, I suppose, the instincts that we already had as parents to limit that time.
It is important that parents get sort of real life guidance. People will follow their own instincts in terms of what is and it isn't too much, but people will want information about what it's doing maybe to a child's mental development, and it's important that they have scientifically evidenced and non-judgmental advice, and that they can use that to fit in with their own lives.
So I think it's probably fair, isn't it, to say that the report shows that children are using screens too much, too often, and that parents are trying to combat that, but are maybe a bit lost as to what they should be doing and where they should be getting that guidance from. What were the main recommendations from the report?
Well, based on what parents have told us, we came up with 4 recommendations. The first is to issue guidance based on the evidence and information available. Now, there was some discussion amongst the parents in terms of who should issue that guidance. It could be the Department of Health, it could be the Public Health Agency. In their eyes, they just wanted the guidance. The second recommendation was for the Department of Education to issue guidance to schools, because parents don't know how much time children are spending using screens in school. So if you take those hours coupled with what they're doing at home, it can add up to even more. The third recommendation is for training health professionals, training community and voluntary sector workers who interact with children on a daily basis about the effects of screen time and how they can limit screen time as well. And the fourth recommendation was about government departments working together on a cross-departmental strategy to pull all this together.
I fully support the recommendations in the Children in Northern Ireland Virtual Lives report. I think they're easily implemented and practical. And I mean, if we look at something around guidance for schools, I think that would be helpful, and for parents as well, because we get mixed messages. There's so much push now towards getting your child digitised, get them computer programming, get them ICT literate, and I can see how that's a great advantage in the world of work, but it has to be balanced with good PE, good time outdoors, and experience in the natural environment. So I think guidance for teachers and parents and finding that balance.
Well, as an MLA, I'm supportive of generally the recommendations, but specifically recommendation 1 around the Public Health Agency and the Department of Health issuing that guidance to parents on appropriate levels of usage and factors to consider, and also the second recommendation, which is guidance in education setting and childcare settings, because it's important that parents know what exposure children have had to screens when they're in school or in preschool or in creche, because without that information, and very many kids are in one of those settings, they won't be able to have a full picture, so to speak, of how much screen time their child is having.
Yeah, the work by Children in Northern Ireland on the Virtual Lives report is really important and timely. Particularly welcome the 2 recommendations suggesting that the Department of Health issue guidance for parents and that the Department of Education issue guidance for educators. I think that they're 2 key groups of people who, properly informed, can ensure that our devices are used in constructive and safe ways, and that they don't start damaging the health or social value of our families and our community.
Ellen, thank you so much for taking me through the report. Such a useful document for parents like me to go away and deal with a tricky subject.
Thank you. It was a really interesting piece of research, and we do hope that it helps parents.
If you would like to read Virtual Lives yourself, head over to Children in Northern Ireland's website to download the report.